A daring adventure quickly turns into a fight for survival as John Matthews, an experienced hiker, finds himself trapped in the heart of a cave for over 30 agonizing hours. With nothing but darkness and his own thoughts, John faces the cruel isolation of being stuck in an endless labyrinth of rock. As he fights for his life, little does he know that when rescuers finally reach him, what they find will be something far beyond what anyone could have ever expected. But what truly happened to John during those long, lonely hours? John Matthews, an avid adventurer and seasoned hiker, had spent countless hours exploring caves and trails across the country. He was no stranger to the rugged outdoors and had developed a profound understanding of nature's raw power and unpredictable temperament. But nothing could have prepared him for the harrowing ordeal he was about to face in the cave that fateful weekend. It all started with a routine hiking trip to one of the most popular caves in the region. John had planned on taking the trip alone, as he often did, relishing the solitude and the peace of being surrounded by nothing but the sounds of his breath and the crunch of gravel beneath his boots. But as John ventured deeper into the cave, something went wrong, something he did not anticipate. The further he went, the more disorienting the twists and turns of the cave became. The once manageable paths had become steep and narrow, and John soon found himself in a deep crevice, unable to climb out. Panic set in. He tried calling for help, but there was no response, just the oppressive silence of the cave. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He was trapped. With every passing hour, his situation grew more dire. Alone in the dark, John struggled to stay calm, rationing his food and water as best he could. His thoughts began to drift toward the worst possible scenarios, and with each passing hour, the weight of his isolation grew heavier. But that wasn't the worst part. Soon, John began to hear something. A faint sound, almost like breathing, echoing from deep within the cave's walls. Something was with him, something he couldn't see. As the hours passed, John's mind started to unravel. Was it just his imagination playing tricks on him? Or was there something in that cave with him? Something far more sinister than just a man lost in the dark? When the rescuers finally arrived, what they found in that cave would leave everyone stunned. John's heart raced as he realized the gravity of his situation. He had been alone for what felt like days, though he knew it had only been hours. The deep, suffocating darkness of the cave surrounded him, cutting off all sense of time and space. His attempts to escape had been futile, and now, the real fear had set in. He might not make it out alive. Each step he took seemed to bring him deeper into the cave, away from any hope of finding an exit. The walls were narrow and jagged, and the path had led him into a cramped crevice where even the faintest light from his flashlight could not penetrate. John sat down on a stone slab, breathing heavily. His throat was dry, his muscles sore from hours of climbing and crawling. But it was the silence that was the worst. The silence that stretched on for what felt like eternity. He pulled out his phone one last time, desperately trying to call for help, but there was no signal. The phone screen glowed faintly, a reminder of his isolation. Panic set in as he realized he had no way to reach anyone. With no food or water and nowhere to turn, John began to question whether anyone would even know he was missing until it was too late. As his thoughts spiraled, a strange noise broke the silence, a faint, rasping sound, like breathing. At first, John dismissed it as the cave itself shifting, but it happened again and again. His heart raced as he realized it wasn't just the wind. There was something in the cave with him, something moving in the darkness. He quickly turned his flashlight to the source of the sound, but saw nothing, only shadows. Was it an animal? Could it be another person? Or was it something worse? The sound seemed to draw closer, growing louder, but there was nothing to see. His mind raced with terrifying possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. In his exhaustion and fear, he struggled to maintain control of his thoughts, each passing moment pulling him deeper into panic. The darkness was no longer just a lack of light. It was a presence, something cold and unfathomable. John tried to stay calm, focusing on his breath as best he could. He knew that panicking wouldn't help him, but with every passing second, the sensation of being watched, the sound of breath in the dark, became more and more real. Was it just his mind, Or was something that defied logic and explanation, truly lurking in the cave with him? As the hours stretched into an agonizing day, John's physical state began to deteriorate. The dry air of the cave, combined with his dehydration, made it increasingly difficult to think clearly. His thoughts were clouded, his body weakening with every passing hour. The only thing that kept him going was the faint hope that help would come soon. But deep down, he knew that unless he did something to change his fate, he would be alone in this dark, suffocating place forever. John knew he had to conserve his energy, but the pain in his legs and arms from scrambling across the jagged rocks was unbearable. He had tried everything, climbing, squeezing through narrow passages, and searching for an exit, but each attempt ended in failure. His flashlight flickered, casting strange, unsettling shadows on the cave's walls. The thought of being left to die in this dark, silent tomb was enough to send a chill down his spine. The eerie sound of breathing continued to echo through the cave, growing louder and more distinct with each passing hour. But no matter how hard he searched, he could find nothing. His flashlight illuminated nothing more than smooth rock and jagged edges. Yet, the sensation of being followed, of being watched, was undeniable. The noises had become a constant companion in the oppressive darkness. John attempted to calm himself by focusing on the basics, staying hydrated, keeping his wits about him, and rationing what little food he had left. His mind kept returning to the breathing sounds. He had to know what it was. But as the hours wore on, the mystery deepened. The breathing grew closer, more pronounced, and yet John could see nothing. It wasn't just the unknown sounds that were terrifying him. It was the realization that he was running out of time. His phone battery was low, and there was no way to know if anyone was even looking for him. As John crouched down to rest for a moment, he closed his eyes and prayed for rescue. Prayed for someone to hear him, to find him before it was too late. Back on the surface, a rescue mission was beginning to take shape, though no one could have predicted the challenges they were about to face. News had spread about a hiker, John Matthews, who had failed to return from his solo adventure, and his friends and family were starting to worry. With John's absence stretching from hours into a day, the search teams mobilized. But finding a lost person in a vast cave system was no easy task. Rescue teams, some of the best in the region, were on their way. Equipped with the best technology available, including drones, search dogs, and a fleet of experienced cavers, they began combing through the area. But there was one problem. The cave was notorious for its labyrinthine network of tunnels and traps, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact location of John Matthews. No one knew which path he had taken, and without a direct signal or clear trace of his movements, every passing hour made the task harder. The cave had claimed its fair share of lives over the years. Over the decades, many adventurers had entered it, only to be lost forever. This was not an easy environment to navigate, and the rescue mission would be one of the most difficult the team had ever attempted. Still, there was hope. John was known to be resilient, and it was possible that he was still alive, still waiting for help to arrive. As the search teams deployed deeper into the cave system, they made a chilling discovery. A hiker's backpack had been found wedged between rocks. It was the first real clue that indicated they were on the right path. This was no longer a theoretical search. This was a search for a living human being, and they had just found something that told them they were close. But the terror that filled the air was undeniable. The clock was ticking, and every second could be the difference between life and death. John, meanwhile, was in a state of physical and mental exhaustion. He hadn't eaten anything in hours, his body was frail from dehydration, and the growing darkness around him had started to take on a menacing quality. Despite his training and experience, the isolation was beginning to wear him down. The presence he had felt, the breathing, the unsettling noise from the depths of the cave, had become more pronounced. Was it an animal? Or was it something else, something more sinister? The fear that gripped John's heart was not just physical, it was psychological. Every noise seemed to echo through the cave. Every turn seemed to bring him deeper into unknown territory. As he continued to struggle, the only thing keeping him moving was the hope that someone, anyone, would find him before it was too late. He had no way of knowing whether his rescuers were even looking in the right place. 30 hours had passed. The feeling of panic John had initially experienced had now been replaced by an overwhelming sense of defeat. His body was exhausted, his mind disoriented. At some point, he had fallen asleep, only to be awoken by the continued sound of breathing. Closer now, as though it was no longer just an echo, but something real, something alive. The noise grew louder, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. John tried to convince himself that it was merely his body playing tricks on him, but as the hours dragged on, it was becoming harder to ignore. He knew he could not survive much longer in such conditions, and the thought of being trapped with something that may be far more dangerous than he had initially feared began to eat at him. The sense of being watched, the oppressive weight of the cave, and the unseen force that seemed to follow him had him spiraling into paranoia. Was it just his imagination, or was something truly lurking in the shadows? There was no way to know. With every passing hour, the darkness around him felt more alive. Time seemed irrelevant. All that mattered now was surviving. He thought of his family and friends, wondering if they had begun searching for him. He could only hope that someone would come soon, that they would find him before it was too late. The air grew colder, and John's body began to betray him. His muscles were stiff and sore, his fingers numb from the cold, and the darkness was closing in tighter with each passing moment. His flashlight, now flickering, was losing its battery. John realized that if his light failed him, he would be left in complete darkness. Worse still, he had no way of knowing if the sound was real or if it was a product of his deteriorating mental state. Suddenly, through the haze of exhaustion, John heard a new sound, something that wasn't there before. The air seemed to shift. A small, distant light flickered in the distance, and John's heart leaped in his chest. Was it a rescue team? Had they finally found him? He pushed himself up, stumbling toward the light, his every movement a battle. His thoughts were scattered, and the sounds of breathing were now louder than ever. He could no longer tell if they were coming from behind him or ahead of him. All he knew was that he could not stay in one place for long. There was something in the cave with him, and the terror of it was more paralyzing than the darkness. As he approached the light, his vision blurry and his body trembling, he thought he heard voices calling his name. He was no longer sure if they were real, but he stumbled forward, desperate for confirmation. The light that John had seen from a distance was not a figment of his imagination. It was real, but it was the look in his eyes, fear mixed with relief, that struck Mark the hardest. The man had been through a living nightmare. "You're safe now, John. We've got you," Mark said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. John could not speak, but he nodded faintly, knowing he had made it through the darkest hour. He had survived, barely, but the danger had not yet passed. The cave was still unpredictable, and the rescuers had to work quickly. They immediately began to assess his condition, offering him water and quickly starting to prepare him for the long journey back out of the cave. But just as they were about to carry him out, a strange noise echoed through the narrow passageway. It wasn't the usual hum of the cave. This sound was different. It was almost as if the walls of the cave were alive, pulsing with an energy that had not been there before. John looked around in confusion, his heart racing. "What is that sound?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. One of the rescuers, a woman named Sarah, looked at him, her face a mask of concern. "I don't know, but it's not good. We need to move now." As they hurriedly prepared to exit, the sound grew louder, closer. It was then that they realized the cave was shifting. The vibrations they were feeling were not just a coincidence. Something was happening. The rock around them began to tremble. "Everyone, move fast," Mark shouted, his voice strained. "We've got to get out of here now." The rescue mission, which had been running smoothly up until that point, was quickly turning into a chaotic scramble for safety. The cave, it seemed, was no longer a passive environment. It was alive and angry. John, weakened and still recovering, was helped to his feet as they began to make their way out. The air was thick with dust, and the temperature seemed to drop by the minute. The rescuers were moving swiftly, but with every step, it felt like the cave was closing in around them. As the rescue team moved deeper into the cave system, the tremors grew stronger. The ground beneath them shook with increasing intensity, and the walls seemed to pulse in sync with the vibrations. The very air around them felt charged, as if some force within the cave had awoken. Just when it seemed that the worst was over, the rescuers stumbled upon something that would change the course of their mission forever. At first, it appeared to be just another tunnel, another passageway they needed to navigate in order to escape. But as they moved closer, a strange glow caught their attention, emanating from deep within the cave. Curiosity piqued, Mark and Sarah made their way toward the light, carefully pushing aside debris that had fallen from the ceiling. They had no idea what they were walking toward, but their instincts as seasoned rescuers told them this was not a good sign. When they finally reached the source of the glow, their hearts skipped a beat. Before them lay an underground chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The walls of the cave were covered in an unusual moss, glowing softly in the dark. In the center of the chamber, something strange was pulsating, a source of energy, perhaps, or some sort of natural phenomenon. It was like a living thing, moving and breathing in a rhythmic pattern. But that was not the most unsettling part. As they stepped into the chamber, the ground beneath their feet gave way, and they found themselves tumbling into a massive pit. The fall was swift, but not as dangerous as it could have been. When they finally stopped, they realized they had landed in a deep, cavernous hole. At the bottom of the pit, something strange caught Mark's eye. It was a dark figure, hunched over, moving with an eerie grace. For a moment, he thought it was another hiker, another lost soul. But as he approached, the truth became terrifyingly clear. It was not human. It was something else, something that should not have existed in a cave so far removed from the outside world. And as the figure turned its head, Mark realized with a shock that it had been watching them all along. The creature's eyes gleamed with a chilling light, and its sharp, jagged teeth glistened in the dim light of the cavern. Mark and Sarah froze in place, unsure of what to do next. They had no weapons, no way to defend themselves from whatever this creature was. The only thing they could do was move quickly and escape before it was too late. But as they turned to flee, the creature made its move. It lunged at them with lightning speed, knocking them both to the ground. For a moment, everything went black, and all they could hear was the sound of their own hearts pounding in their chests. It wasn't until they woke up, unharmed, but with a sense of dread hanging over them, that they realized just how close they had come to something far darker than they could have imagined. With the creature now momentarily subdued, Mark and Sarah quickly regained their composure. The team realized that escaping the cave was their only priority. The walls of the cavern were starting to crack, and the intensity of the tremors had increased. Time was running out, and they had no choice but to leave. Carrying John, who had barely regained his strength, the team hurried through the cave system, making their way back to the surface. The path was treacherous, with falling rocks and unstable ground making every step a dangerous gamble. The sound of the cave shifting around them was deafening, and the air was thick with dust. Despite everything, John remained conscious, his resolve stronger than ever. He could hear the rescuers talking urgently as they navigated the cave's dangerous twists and turns. He wasn't sure if he was hearing correctly, but it seemed like they were discussing something about the creature they had encountered in the chamber. The cave was no longer just an obstacle they had to conquer. It had become an active, living entity, reacting to their presence, pushing them toward an unknown goal. With a final push, the team made it to the exit, where they were met with daylight. John, finally breathing the fresh air, felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He was free, but the horror of what he had experienced would stay with him forever. After John's miraculous rescue from the cave, the physical and emotional scars were far from over. For John, the journey to recovery was long and filled with uncertainty. His body, though free from the physical confines of the cave, was still weak from the strain of being trapped for over 30 hours. His muscles were sore, his limbs stiff, and the exhaustion of being confined in that dark, suffocating space weighed heavily on him. However, it was not just the physical toll that affected John. His mind struggled to process what had happened, what he had experienced in that cave. Being so close to death, encountering that strange creature, and the inexplicable tremors, was not something he could simply forget. The haunting memories seemed to follow him, dragging him into a state of deep anxiety and depression. Nights were the hardest. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. The echoes of the creature's eyes still burned into his memory. The feeling of its gaze, sharp, cold, and aware, was something John could never fully shake off. He would sometimes lie awake for hours, questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. John tried his best to return to normal life, but things were different now. He had been a delivery man for over a decade, moving from house to house, bringing packages to their rightful owners. The work had always been simple, routine, and monotonous, a life that allowed him to stay under the radar. But now, every step he took felt laden with weight. His past work as a delivery man, once something he had done without much thought, now felt like a reminder of the fateful day he had opened that package. The package that had led him to the cave, to the creature, and into a world where reality seemed to bend and twist in ways he couldn't comprehend. One of the most difficult aspects of John's recovery was the sense of isolation that accompanied his experience. While the rescue team members had their own recovery process, John felt as though he was alone in the aftermath of what had happened. He was the one who had encountered the creature. He was the one who had felt the earth shake, who had heard the strange sounds from deep within the cave. He had been the one to face death, and in doing so, he had been forced to witness something that no one else could truly understand. The other members of the rescue team had been supportive, but even they did not share the same experience, the same trauma. John's interactions with his family and friends also became strained. His wife, Sarah, had been his rock throughout his life, providing support through thick and thin. However, even her patience was tested as John withdrew into himself. Conversations became strained. He would often sit in silence, consumed by the dark thoughts that filled his mind. Sarah, once able to read John like an open book, could no longer find the words to reach him. She knew something was wrong, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't help him. John's emotional distance only grew as the images from the cave became his reality. It wasn't just his personal life that was affected. His job, which had once been a simple means of providing for his family, now felt like a trap. John began to feel like the world outside was closing in on him. He could no longer focus on the mundane tasks that once brought him peace. The act of delivering packages, once a mindless routine, had become a stark reminder of the cave, the creature, and his role in the story. The rescue team had gathered after John's ordeal to reflect on the events and to provide support for one another. Mark, Sarah, and the others were coping in their own ways, though they were still trying to make sense of what they had encountered. The memories of the strange creature, the unexplained tremors, and the overwhelming sense of something unnatural left a deep mark on them all. For many of them, the trauma wasn't something they could process quickly, but they knew they had a responsibility to tell the world what had happened in the cave. The investigation had not yet yielded any answers, and there were no clear explanations for what they had seen, heard, or felt. Mark had become particularly obsessed with finding out more about the creature. His life, too, was transformed by the encounter. Though he had been a seasoned spelunker and rescue worker for years, the cave incident had shaken his belief in everything he thought he knew about the world. As time passed, the rescue team faced more challenges. Some members struggled with the trauma of what they had witnessed, while others were deeply affected by the strange, powerful presence they had sensed in the cave. They didn't speak of it openly, but the shared experience had created a bond among them that couldn't be broken. They knew they would never be the same again. The investigation into the cave's peculiar events continued, but the authorities had little to offer in terms of answers. The official reports listed the cave's terrain as unstable, the tremors as unexplained, and the creature as something no one could fully define. Some authorities believed it was simply a freak accident, a strange anomaly in the cave's geology. Others, however, were not so quick to dismiss the possibility that something far stranger was at play. Dr. Claire Donovan, the cryptozoologist, continued to study the cave's history and the strange creature, but she was unable to offer any definitive conclusions. John, too, became obsessed with finding answers. He couldn't shake the thought that something more was hidden in the depths of that cave. He found himself researching ancient folklore, looking for signs of similar creatures, or looking for any kind of explanation that could connect his experience to something greater. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he would scroll through online articles, books, and documentaries about underground creatures, cave dwellers, and forgotten civilizations. But no matter how much he searched, nothing seemed to match the creature he had seen. In some ways, the aftermath of the cave experience only deepened the mystery. John's life was now tied to the cave, to the creature, and to the terrifying truth that there were things hidden in the world that defied understanding. The world around him moved forward, and life went on. But John could not let go of the past. And no matter how much time passed, he couldn't escape the feeling that he had become part of a much larger story. A story he did not fully understand, but one that would shape his life forever. In the weeks following John's rescue, the authorities began an extensive investigation into the cave's unusual conditions. Experts in geology, spelunking, and even local historians were called to the scene to try and explain the strange occurrence. Could the cave have been naturally altered in some way, causing the tremors and strange events that had occurred during the rescue? Or was there something more sinister at play? The rescue team members, though physically recovered, were still struggling with the emotional toll the incident had taken. Mark, the lead rescuer, felt an unshakable sense of unease about what they had encountered in the cave. The moment he laid eyes on the creature, something deep inside told him that it wasn't just a random anomaly. He reached out to experts in various fields, from cryptozoologists to Claire Donovan, who had studied creatures and phenomena that existed in the realms of mystery and myth. She listened attentively as they recounted the details of the rescue, including the strange creature and the tremors that seemed to be part of the cave's behavior. After hearing their accounts, Dr. Donovan's face remained stoic, but it was clear she was contemplating the implications. There are many legends of creatures that have been hidden beneath the earth for centuries, Dr. Donovan said thoughtfully. Could it be that the vibrations and the energy you felt triggered something in the cave's ecosystem? Or could the creature itself be something that was awakened by the disturbance? Mark was hesitant. It sounds too strange to believe. Dr. Donovan nodded, understanding his skepticism. I know it sounds implausible, but there are things in this world that defy our understanding. The cave could be much older than we think. It may hold secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. As the investigation progressed, other cave divers and experts began to weigh in, offering their own theories. Some believed the creature had been a part of a forgotten local mythology, perhaps a creature that had lived underground for centuries. Others speculated that it could have been a previously undiscovered species, driven into hiding by the conditions within the cave. Meanwhile, John's memories of the cave remained vivid. At night, he would dream of the creature, the feeling of its glowing eyes watching him. His mind was plagued with questions. Was the creature alone? Had it been the cause of the cave's strange behavior? And most importantly, why had it waited so long to reveal itself? The authorities did not have clear answers, but they did what they could to seal off the cave and prevent further exploration. Local news outlets picked up on the story, adding to the mystery. People began to wonder if there was something far more extraordinary waiting to be discovered beneath the surface of their everyday lives. Some even believed that the rescue team had uncovered the entrance to a hidden world, one that was now disturbed and angry. John's life, though physically saved, was forever altered by the event. He began to feel as if the world around him was no longer as it seemed. He had come face to face with something that should not have existed, and the weight of that knowledge weighed heavily on him. Was the world really as safe as it appeared? Or was there a darker, unknown side to reality? Months passed, and the investigation into the cave and its mysterious creature continued. But no one had definitive answers. The cave was officially closed off, and all further attempts at exploration were halted. Mark, Sarah, and the rest of the rescue team were asked to remain quiet about what they had seen, their testimonies becoming part of a growing mystery that seemed to belong to the shadows. Though the cave had been sealed, John could not shake the feeling that something was still out there. The creature they had encountered seemed to have an ancient intelligence, as though it knew they were coming, as though it was aware of the world above the surface. The idea that something so powerful had been hidden away for so long made John uneasy. Could it have been part of something larger? Was it the only one? Or was there more lurking beneath the earth, waiting to be discovered? John tried to move on with his life, but the memories of the cave continued to haunt him. He found himself withdrawing from friends and family, afraid to speak about the creature or what had happened. He could not shake the feeling that there were forces beyond his control, forces that had been awakened by the rescue. His mind would often wander, contemplating the nature of the creature and its possible connection to ancient myths and legends. As time passed, John began to hear strange stories from other spelunkers who had ventured into caves around the world. They spoke of bizarre occurrences, tremors, strange sounds, and even sightings of creatures resembling the one John had encountered. Could it be that there was a hidden network of caves, an underground world full of secrets waiting to be uncovered? The possibility that there was more to the world than what met the eye weighed heavily on John. He could not go back to the life he had known before the rescue. Something had changed within him, something he could not explain. He began to wonder if he was meant to be a part of something larger, something that connected him to the very fabric of the world itself. Despite the closure of the cave, John could not let go of the unanswered questions. He began researching ancient folklore and myths, trying to piece together the fragments of knowledge that might shed light on the creature. He discovered that there were stories of similar creatures across cultures, beings that lived deep within the earth, hidden from the world above. These stories spoke of powerful forces, ancient and mysterious, that had been sealed away long ago to protect the world from their influence. John could not ignore the connection. The creature in the cave, the tremors, the strange energy, they all seemed to point to something far greater than a mere animal or natural anomaly. There was something at work beneath the earth, something that had been disturbed and had left its mark on John. As the years passed, the memory of the cave and its mysteries faded from public consciousness. The investigation was deemed inconclusive, and the story became a whisper, something that people talked about only in hushed tones. The cave was sealed, the creature forgotten. Yet, for John, the experience was something that could never be erased. The world had moved on, but John's mind remained in that dark, haunted place. He had been trapped in that cave for 30 hours, but the real trap had come after his escape. The knowledge he had gained, the truth about what lay beneath the earth, had changed him in ways he could not understand. Though he had returned to the surface, he had never truly escaped. His story, one of survival and mystery, would live on. The unanswered questions would continue to linger, and the memory of the cave and the creature it held would haunt him forever. In the end, the cave had not only trapped John physically, it had ensnared him mentally and spiritually. The true nature of what he had encountered would remain a mystery, but it had opened John's eyes to the possibility of a world far stranger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And as long as he lived, he would never stop searching for the truth.